Hey, what's up guys and welcome back to askNK. Today we're taking a look at 3D Studio Max, Blender, and actually talking about the Extrude Manifold and also the Smart Extrude. There's a conversation about who copied from who. Meanwhile, the 3D Studio Max Smart Extrude is not void of any errors, as I'm also going to go ahead and show you guys this. And just because that there are certain things that you can do in 3D Studio Max right now, it doesn't mean that Blender is obsolete. It just simply means that 3D Studio Max handles these things way miles better. And a huge shout out to the folks at Autodesk for actually making this one work, because the last time that we got this update, I did go through, take a look at it, and I complained about a couple of things, and yes, they did fix it. And of course today I'm back again to complain about some more stuff. Hopefully they will fix it. And the whole idea of copying from one software to another, I don't see it as a bad idea. I actually see it as a way that software companies use to bring those products and those services that their clients or their customers or their user base would want and make them stay within the software. So I guess it's a huge development for everyone. And with that said, let's get right into it. So with 3D Studio Max 2022 open right here, what we're going to do is simply go over to where we have our modifiers. And it's very interesting to see that 3D Studio Max and Blender, they share a lot of things in common, right? So if we go over to our modifiers, we go down here to edit poly and we add one. So just like you work in Blender, component selection is exactly the same. You press one on your keyboard to select your vertex, press 2 to select your edge, but just that Blender doesn't have the border, so you have to press 4 to select the faces. So by default in Blender, once you make a selection like this, for your extrude manifold, what you do is, you move this, and that is pretty nice. And you can also do things like so. So this one is something that lots of you guys have been excited about in Blender, and it's very cool to see that 3D Studio Max now have it and it works better. You cannot get this in Blender, all right? This stuff in Blender doesn't work, right? So we can do something like this. We can do something like this. We can do something like this, but we cannot do something like this. And this is where it actually outshines Blender in a lot of things, all right? It outshines Blender in these regards. So for example, if you also want to scale things, because there's a conversation, if you scale stuff, it doesn't get work. Nope, it does. So if you also scale stuff like, scale, a section like that, and you hold down Shift, click and drag all the way out, it works. You can see that right here. So you can now build a lot of cool things by simply working with the Smart Extrude. And another thing about this one is, despite the fact that you have it going, you can load up another modifier. So we can go in and load up another modifier, and we can still get this thing to work. So I can also come right here and I can say, all right, maybe I want to push this a little bit more. Can bring that all the way down. And of course, we've just created something like this. You can select this one as well and just rotate around and do that. And this way you can start creating things like so. With this here, there's even way more things that you can do. For those who like to maybe merge two objects together and you want to use those objects to bore a hole through something, you want to use those as Smart Extrude, and you want to push these things more, yes, you can. And regardless of how or where you're actually doing this just works. This just simply works. And this is just something that those working with Blender or Blender artists don't have access to. So most of you guys might be saying, no, something like this exists. No, it doesn't. Because if we go over to Blender right now, all right, if we go over to Blender right now, we select this and press tab on the keyboard and switch over to the faces, which you can get by pressing 3 on the keyboard, and you go over to where you have your extrude region, click and hold and go over to your extrude manifold. You can do things like this, all right? So you can do things like so, and you can also move over to a section like this and do things like this, and you can actually do things like this, all right? You can get to this point, which isn't bad. You can also get to this point, which isn't bad, and that's more like what you can get. You cannot clip this thing out. This doesn't seem to work. If you also want to do things like this, no, you cannot clip this out as well. You can get to a point like that, but clipping this out is something that doesn't exist, at least yet. And yes, it is good to actually want to get these features, and it's just worth it to mention this so that the folks at Blender Foundation will be able to look at this and profile some good implementation for something like this that gets to work. But for the conversation of who copied who, I don't think that 3D Studio Max copied Blender, and I don't also think that Blender copied 3D Studio Max. I think these folks actually copied Zbrush, because most of you guys don't know about this one, but Zbrush by default did have this feature long time. All right, so by default, once you're working with ZBrush, so let's lose our symmetry and let's make this a polymesh 3D, go all the way down, switch over to initialize, set this to the Q brush or to the Q cube, and then set this to the polyframe. This is what we have. So by default, once you're working with ZBrush and you go over to your brush and go all the way down to where you have your Z modular brush, you can use the Qmesh, which you can access by right clicking and selecting Qmesh, and this is there by default. You can use the Qmesh to do the same thing. All right, so I can push this all the way in. So let's actually push this all the way in, push this all the way in to get a result like that. And of course, you would also notice that it's also not void of errors, but this is there. So you can also push this all the way out, push this all the way out, push this all the way out, and also do the same thing like so. Okay, so we can just make sure that we have that there, move this right there. So, you know, ZBrush had this for a very long time. So it's just interesting to see that most of you guys didn't know that this was existing, and I guess that's why there's a lot of rage. So if I also move this down, we can also do some more stuff. So I can move this like so, move this like this, move it a little bit upwards, move this one out, and we can do some crazy stuff with this. We can also go all the way inwards like so, maybe go about like that, do something like this. And if we like to merge things together, merge this, and you see automatically it merges, and you can merge things like this. Now for those guys who will be saying, I mean, is it just only one part that you can do? 3D Studio Max and Blender could do multiple parts. Okay, if you hold down Alt and you do this, you know, click and drag to create more like a selection for polyface or polygroup, you can do all of that stuff. You can also do the same thing here, do all of these things. All right, so just think about all of the powers that you have with this thing right now, and now it begins to make sense why you know, most of the tools that are trying to get this happening are actually gone in for something like this, so we can also get that working. So it's only 3D Studio Max that I've come to see that kind of have this sort of implementation where you can select from one surface and attach to another surface. Right now, Blender doesn't have that, and it is actually nothing to be shy about. It's just there that it doesn't have it, and hopefully the developers will take a look and maybe implement something like this. So for those who are thinking about, you know, working with something like this, maybe you don't have an idea that this actually exists in the first place. Yes, it does. And for Blender, this is something that you cannot get at this right now. We cannot merge these two together. Okay, so these two cannot be merged. I mean, in Blender, these two cannot be merged, but in 3D Studio Max, yes, you can actually get something like that happening. So let's say we move all the way back to what we had before, and we move like one step. So I'm just going to select these, hold down Control, select these 3 or these 4, hold down Shift, click and drag. And maybe we should do that one more time. So hold down Shift again, click and drag. And that's also another thing. In 3D Studio Max, to every dragging that you have or to every creation that you make, there is a loop, which is something that you don't get here. So I made sure that the wireframe was turned on for this one so that you guys can see. All right, so I made sure that we had the wireframe for this one so that you guys can see. For every, you know, creation that we have, you don't see that loop, which makes it a little bit harder for you to know exactly what you're doing. So you don't see that loop, and yeah, it might not just be like the best thing right now. So for those who are raging about it, 3D Studio Max didn't copy Blender, neither did Blender copy 3D Studio Max. They all copied ZBrush, and it's just very cool to see that, you know, these features are now making it to very, you know, Titan looking modeling tool sets like this. And while we're talking about these things, there's also something that 3D Studio Max, as good as it sounds, cannot handle. All right, so there's a lot of things that it can handle properly, especially with this smart extrude, and no one is talking about it, and that is why we're going to talk about it. One of the things that it cannot handle is this. If we go back and do the same example that we did before, which is scaling this all the way up and maybe scaling this all the way up as well, and we hold down Shift and click and drag. Of course, we were very excited about this one in the beginning, right? Now if we hold down Shift, click and drag as well, you should be excited right now, but then there is a black hole right here. I don't know why this is here. I don't know who made this, but there is one. So it is not perfect to, you know, it's not perfect in that regards. That's number one. Number two, the smart extrude works mostly on objects that are basically flat objects. What I mean by this is if we simply select this, lose that, go over to the creation and let's grab a torus. I think that's a good example. And let's also switch to our top view, create something like that. Just make sure that we have that there. Come right here and let's expand that. If we right click and simply convert this to an editable poly and then switch over to the faces and make our selection, take a look at this. If I have this here and let's say for some reason, okay, for some reason I choose to move this, first of all it's set to view, so you have to set it to local. Okay, so if I hold down shift, click and drag, you notice we have the same thing, which is nice. If I hold down shift, click and drag in, is nice, but this is what happens. We cannot clean this out. All right, it doesn't work. Another thing which happens is if I also hold down shift, select, and maybe do a ring selection like so, and I choose to rotate these about a point like that, click and drag and choose to do the same thing, nope, it doesn't work. So there is definitely something that is making this not work, and I think it has to do with the normal of what we are working with. And on the other hand, I did try out with all of these ones and none of them actually stuck. All right, so this is a bug that is, this is more like a bug or something that you need to learn how to deal with. But for those who want to use the Smart Extrude, this is on a flat surface thingy and you can work with it. And the same error that we have here is potentially the same kind of error that we will be having in Blender. And yes, I know most of you guys would be like, all right, if Blender couldn't handle the other one. And yeah, it's just the same thing, right? So if I go in and I make a selection, switch over to the Extrude Manifold, we can do something like this. And then we can, get the same result like that. So that is also something that most of you guys need to have in mind. Meanwhile, the grandfather of all of these things, which is Zbrush, does have a different way of handling things like this. So if we switch back to this, click on the gear icon and select the ring, which is our preferred tool right now. Let's just bring that down, and maybe we can also, split that to that point, make this a bit thicker, and also, just drop it to a point like this. This looks good. Maybe we should just get it to a point like so. And if we go back to this part and switch over to the gizmo, select it, roll this pin all the way. Let's see, where are we looking at? We're looking at the front view. If we roll this all the way to that point and use this to do that, you see what we have. Clean this out, it works. Drag this up, clean this out. Drag this up, clean this out, So Zbrush sort of have a very wonderful way of handling this. And yeah, if anyone is going to be copying, I think the idea is to copy properly and make it right. So this is more like it, and of course I would like to know what you guys think about this one in the comment section. And for those who have conversations about this thing, you want to talk about it, please put it in the comment section. And for those who like to test these things out, you can simply go over to the link in the description and grab a 14-day trial version of Zbrush, or I think a 30-day trial version. Grab it. And for those who like to get 3D Studio Max, you can also grab 3D Studio Max for free for I think 30 days, and you can use that and test it out, see what you can get from it, and then you can make your decisions. And Blender is for free for anyone who wants to get it. Links to all of this is going to be in the description, so do well to check these things out. Tell me what you guys think about this one in the comment section. And of course, if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give it a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. And if you're new here, it's going to be amazing for you to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next video or the next update. And until I see you guys again with a tutorial update, Free Friday, Tutorial Tuesday, tips and tricks, things like this. Peace.